Hello, thanks for listening, folks. This is Michael for SNN, Southern Nationalist Network. And on the line, we have Dr. Michael Hill, the president of the League of the South, a former university professor who taught British history and is the author of Celtic Warfare and Fire and Sword. So, Dr. Hill, thank you for speaking with us.
Oh, Michael, it's always my pleasure.
Now, your background is perfect for our topic today, being a historian of British history and the author of 2 books related to the Celts and British history. So we hear a lot on the Internet and in Southern circles these days about the Celtic South. And my question to you is, to what extent is the South actually Celtic?
Well, to a large degree, Michael. While the Tidewater area of Virginia, for example, was settled mainly by Englishmen from the western side of the country of England, from the southwest up to the northwest.
Yes, sir.
The frontier region was a bit later, settled by people from Scotland, the Lowlands and Highlands, from Wales and from Ireland, the Celtic people of the British Isles, and they were more frontiersmen and settled in the less civilized and populated areas of the frontier and provided a bulwark against the Indians for the people who settled and developed the Tidewater area. So, yeah, it's not completely Celtic, but certainly the Celtic influence is tremendous in the South, and particularly the interior regions of the South, and specifically the mountainous regions of the South.
Mm-hmm. And why do you believe that this is important?
Well, they left their stamp, their cultural and genetic stamp on the area here, and without their presence and without their influence, the South would simply not be the South that we know.
So do you believe that coming from or having this Celtic influence in our genetic background, our cultural background, that it makes us distinct from other regions of North America?
Oh, absolutely. Now, that's not to say that there are not Celtic people in other regions of the country, because there are, but not to the degree that there are and have been in the South. And certainly the influence of the Celtic people in the South has been tremendous compared to the influence of Celtic people in other parts of the country. The only other part of the country that I can think of where their influence may be approaching the degree would be out in the sparsely populated mountain states, because a lot of the mountain men and trappers and scouts and things like that, and even cowboys who went out there, of course, were Celtic Southerners. So our influence has even, spread out into that area, but, that's still a Celtic Southern influence at work there. But, yeah, it's tremendous. And again, I'm not trying to take anything away from the other groups of people who have historically been in the South, but I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a group whose influence had been any greater than the Celts.
Mm-hmm. Well, you bring up this about these other groups, and I have seen lately, especially on some sites that deal with Southern issues, a criticism of the Southern movement in that, the accusation is that we focus too much on this Celtic background, that we make too much out of it, that we diminish the contributions specifically of the English. That's the accusations that I see.
Yeah. Well, I think that you probably can make too much out of it. I'm not sure that we have. Because, if you say, well, the South is Celtic, well, yes and no. I mean, nobody's trying to deny that it is, but it's not completely. And, men like Lee were more of an English background than a Celtic background, I believe. And that's certainly not to take anything away from him, nor the Anglo part of it. Years ago, I started talking about the anglo-celtic makeup of the South, and I think that's probably the best way to do it, because you certainly have to give the people from English backgrounds their due. They've made a large contribution to the South historically and continue to do so today. So, I think a more accurate way to say it is probably the influence from the British Isles as a whole in the South has been tremendous, and that's where it's gotten its stamp, cultural, genetic, etc. But I think before the 1970s and 80s, when the Celtic thesis of American history came out, nobody hardly gave the Celts any credit for what they had done to make the South into what it is. So I think maybe there's a little bit of enthusiasm on the part of us who were part of that new movement in history to, say that the Celts were important and they did a lot to make the South into what it was. And I think in the process maybe we kind of overlooked what the English contribution was. But certainly I think that it's impossible for anybody to deny the Anglo-Celtic domination of the South. And, if you go back and study British history, which I have, there's an awful lot of interconnectedness between the Celts and the, shall we say, Anglo-Saxons and the Normans who came in and pretty much conquered a good deal of the British Isles. There's a lot of interplay and connection between these peoples, and it's sometimes hard to understand where one's influence stops and others begins. Let me give you an example. Everybody talks about the great martial tradition of the South being mainly a Celtic tradition, and I'm not trying to diminish the Celtic influence there, but if you know anything about the Normans, historically, their martial tradition was tremendous as well. And a lot of Southerners, while they may not have a predominance of Norman blood, probably do have a good deal of it coursing through their veins. So I think you have to be careful here, but the Celtic influence was tremendous. It's very hard to say exactly how much it was because, obviously the South is not a monolith. Texas is different from Virginia. Parts of Alabama are different from other parts of Alabama. So, you have to be kind of careful about talking in monolithic terms here about what the South is. But, the Celtic influence is tremendous down here.
Well, it's interesting that you brought up the point how, at one point the history books tended to focus on more of the English origins of the South, and that's true. A lot of the old history books that I have, they don't mention the Celtic parts really at all. They refer to the English parts of our ancestry. But when you go overseas, like I spent some time in Belfast in areas of Ulster there in Northern Ireland, they know very well about the connections to the South, and you see Confederate murals and lots of links to from there to our people here, to our culture.
Absolutely, Michael. I've spent a good deal of time up in that part of the world too, in Northern Ireland and Belfast, and I found the same thing. And I think they have understood it for a lot longer than we have, because you're right about those old history books. And, I think that's in large part historical laziness on the part of historians, just to say, well, anybody who comes from the British Isles is English. Kind of like Europeans thinking that, everybody who comes from America must be from New York. So it's kind of the same thing. It's really laziness on the part of historians. I don't think that there was any dark, nefarious intent in their purposes here to do that. It's just, they didn't differentiate between the various people who live in the British Isles, and where they came from and where they settled in this on this side of the Atlantic.
From your study of British history, what kind of attributes do you think tend to connect the Celtic people over time, going back, far into the distant history to today? Do you see any connections?
Oh yeah, we're still the same people. We're a rural agricultural people, and even though obviously a lot of us, well, I live out in the country, but a lot of Celtic people in the South don't, but they still retain that sort of worldview, and you scratch them, and beneath it you find somebody who enjoys planting a garden or hunting or fishing, and all those sort of rural, rustic pursuits. Also, there are people, of honor. There was a study done by some psychologists 10 or 15 years ago, and they found out that white Southern males had a much more developed sense of honor than white males who lived in other parts of the country, and they were kind of scratching their heads about it. It didn't mystify me at all. That's how Celts are. They have a very highly developed sense of honor, and if you cross the line, they'll fight you. So, we have that sort of martial spirit, that sort of rural mentality. We're very family-oriented. We tend to know a lot about our families, love our families. Our families are ours, right or wrong. And that's the way it should be, because it's really an admonition to, honor thy father and mother, broadly defined.
Right.
We're also a very religious people. We're a very creative people, a very musical and literate people, despite what all these idiots elsewhere try to say about us being backwards and uneducated. I'll put Southern writers and musicians up against any in the world,
right.
And that's a Celtic trait. We're just a very fun-loving people. We're not dour and pessimistic, and we don't slave and work all our lives to accumulate the almighty dollar. Not to say that we don't like to get some dollars in our pockets, but when we get them in our pockets, we want to use them to have some fun with, and not just accumulate money for the sake of accumulating money. So our worldview, I think, is a lot more lively and all than the worldview of a lot of those dark, dour New Englanders, historically speaking.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that about kind of the clan mentality, the closeness of family. Dr. Thomas Fleming, who I believe you know. Do you know Dr. Fleming?
Dr. Fleming and I are longtime friends.
He's got some great material online folks can check out, but he talked a lot about this connection of family, and I've listened to speeches where he talks about the Scots and how important that was to their identity and their worldview. And I'm wondering if there's been a lot made of the more Germanic aspects of the Midwest and much of the North. And I wonder if you would say that there's a kind of divide between the British mentality and then the more continental mentality. And
yes,
do you see that here in North America?
Yeah, I really do think that there is, because, a lot of the, Anglo-Saxon people who were basically the founding stock of what we call the modern-day English, they've been isolated from their continental brethren for many, many centuries, and they've rubbed shoulders very closely, albeit it hadn't always been peacefully, with the Celtic people. So I think that the English today are, because of that, very different from their continental brothers and sisters, such as Frenchmen and Germans and Poles and Spaniards and Italians, because of that more isolated existence on an island, and then the fact that you've had another large cultural group, the Celts, which they've intermingled and contended.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is an interesting topic that maybe we can develop more sometime in the future. But you have 2 books on this that I want to recommend that folks check out. And that is Celtic Warfare and Fire and Sword. From their titles, these focus more on the fighting aspects of the Celtic people.
Well, yes, I do dwell to some degree on their general cultural traits and their general history, but I've always been a military historian, Michael, and I kind of enjoy that, and that's really my area of expertise. And you couldn't find a better people to write about if you wanted to write about military things than the Celts, because they were always fighting somebody. If they didn't have an external enemy to fight, unfortunately, they would fight among themselves, which we Southerners still have not quite gotten over, to our own detriment, I might say. But yeah, these are mainly military history books.
All right, and if people want to read those, how would they order these books?
The webmaster on our League of the South website, Terry Compton, has been so kind as to put those in the merchandise section under books, so people can go to the League of the South website, which is DixieNet, DIXIENET.org, and just click on the merchandise section on the left-hand side of the page. Go to books, and you'll find them listed there, and you can order them that way online. So, and if you want to order them, the old-fashioned way, just my address is on the website. You can just order them directly from me.
Okay. Well, Dr. Hill, I appreciate you speaking with me today. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Michael, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. And again, I want to thank you for all you do for the Southern Nationalist movement. You're a very valuable asset to the movement that we're all working for here. And I again, thank you for all that you do.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hill. And I'll talk to you again soon, hopefully.
All right. Good night. God bless, and Merry Christmas to everybody.
Merry Christmas to you.